Salvador Allende was the president of Chile between 1970 and 1973. Now, you would think that some random Latin American president from the early 70s wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? I mean, who gives a shit, really? But in point of fact, Salvador Allende is something of a hero to the political left, and for a very interesting reason. You see, Salvador Allende was the first democratically elected socialist president in history. In point of fact, he was the only democratically elected socialist president in history. Now, when I talk about Allende being a socialist, I'm not talking about like the milquetoast socialism of today, the champagne socialism, the free market neoliberal socialism that we know today. Those parties have absolutely nothing to do with the socialism of the 70s. Because of course, the socialists of today, the people who call themselves socialists today, they're all in favor of free markets. They're all in favor of neoliberal economic policies. Why? Because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1989, 1990, when the Soviet Union finally died, nobody intellectually serious could continue to call themselves a socialist who was not a reformed socialist, because the rubble of the Soviet Empire gave lie to the idea that socialism was the way to go. Obviously. And now the communists in China, that was even a bigger lesson. The communists in China, yeah, the Communist Party still exists in China, but they are capitalists. Everybody knows that. And the economic miracle of China, again, gives lie to the notion that socialism can provide material benefits to the people. But in 1970, this wasn't so clear. It wasn't clear at all that socialism was a recipe for disaster. So the people of Chile elected Salvador Allende, and because he was an avowed socialist who tried to implement socialist ideas in Chilean society, he's held up today as this saint/martyr. Because of course he was overthrown less than 3 years later by a military coup. Now let's look at Salvador Allende a little bit more closely. From the very beginning, okay? From the very get-go, let's look at the man closely and figure out what's what. Let's figure out what is the truth and what are left-wing lies. Because the left loves to lie about Salvador Allende and paint him to be somebody that he most definitely was not. Salvador Allende won the election of 1970 for president of Chile. And that election right away had an asterisk to it. And it was a very simple asterisk. You see, the presidential elections in Chile were every 6 years. And in 1970, Salvador Allende ran against two other opponents. There were three candidates for that election. There was Salvador Allende, who represented the Popular Unity. That was an election amalgamation, really, of communist parties, socialist parties, and hard left parties. Then the center parties were led by Rodomiro Tomic, and that was the Christian Democrats. And the right-wing party, headed by the Partido Nacional, the National Party, was led by Jorge Alessandri. Those were the three candidates in the 1970 election, and what happened was that Allende won a plurality, not a majority, a plurality of the votes, because there was a three-way tie, statistically speaking. Allende squeaked out a win with 33% of the vote, which is interesting because that 33% of the vote in 1970 was less than he had gotten in 1964, when he had also run for president. And that election, in the 64 election, he got 39% of the vote, which was statistically and in absolute terms more votes than he got in the 1970 election. But what had happened in the 1964 election was that it was Allende running against Eduardo Frei Montalva, the Christian Democrat. And the right-wing parties decided not to field a candidate in the 1964 election and instead support Eduardo Frei. And so in 1970, Allende got fewer votes than in 64, but he won the presidency. So what did Allende do in short order? He started implementing socialist economic policies. And one of the first policies that he implemented, and I'm simplifying here grossly, but just to make it clear to you what he was more or less doing, he basically and in essence froze the prices of all goods and services and raised wages by 10%. What do you think is going to happen? Well, the obvious happened. Hyperinflation. It happened like that. Within a few months of these economic policies happening, Chilean inflation, the inflation of the escudo, which was the currency at the time, the escudo started to lose value rapidly. I mean, it started just to disintegrate as a currency. Okay? And the only thing propping it up were the foreign currency reserves of Chile, because in 1970, Chile was a fairly prosperous country, and all of the successive governments had been very careful to maintain a positive balance of trade and to never ever run any kind of fiscal deficit. So Chile had a very large supply of hard foreign currencies, dollars, pounds, what have you. Okay, so financially, Chile was in very good shape when Allende came in with his policies that started costing all kinds of money, right? Chile's economy went down the tubes because by these policies, what happened? Think of it in these terms. Suppose I manufacture, just for the sake of argument, toothpaste, and I sell my toothpaste at 100, right? Now I pay my workers and my expenses and what have you is 95, again, for the sake of argument. So that 5, the difference between 100, my sales price, and the 95 that I pay my workers, that is my margin, my profit margin, right? But now the government is telling me that I have to up the wages of my workers. I have to pay them 105, but I can't raise my prices. I have to still sell at 100. So what does that mean? I'm going to start losing money, right? Am I going to continue to operate? No! I'm going to close my factory. I'm going to close my factory because I can't afford to be paying these workers, because I'm losing money. Who in his right mind would continue to operate if he's losing money? Nobody, of course, right? And so what happened was that I closed my toothpaste factory. And all of a sudden, in short order, there's no more toothpaste. People just don't have toothpaste. In essence, this is what happened because of Allende's policies. Now, because of these shortages, Allende used this as the excuse to nationalize the industries. Oh, Mr. Coach Red Pill, you manufacture toothpaste, but you're not producing toothpaste? Oh, because you're losing money. Well, tough deal. We're going to take over your toothpaste manufacturing firm, nationalize it, and we, the state, we are going to start producing toothpaste for the people. That's what Allende and his goons started to do. And they started doing it across the entire economy. They started nationalizing all kinds of factories. You know, the biggest industries in Chile and even the lowest little, piddly little factory. And they started nationalizing everything and politicizing everything. There would be a representative of the popular unity parties in every factory supervising the general manager of the factory or whatever. That's how it went. And of course, these factories started producing stuff, right? And the government started to take over the distribution because there were no goods and services anymore, because, you know, everything had shut down, everything was falling apart, right? People were making huge lines for toilet paper and toothpaste and everything, the basics, what you need to survive. They were lining up all over the place. A black market flourished, and the black market, of course, didn't want to school those, which were losing value on a daily basis. They wanted dollars, only dollars. And so people started selling everything that they had in order to get dollars to buy the basics. I'm talking heating oil. I'm talking, you know, toothpaste and toilet paper and food. Food. The Allende government created the JAPs, the famous JAPs, JAP, Juntas de Abastecimiento Popular. That means literally Committees for Popular Supply. Basically, rationing. A country that had been prosperous in 1970, you know, with a positive balance of trade in 1970. By 1972, they were rationing food, basics, cooking oil, lard. That's what was being rationed. And they created these CAPs, these committees of popular supply, and you would get a ration card. You would get a ration card. And it was only with the ration card that you could go and get the basics like rice, like potatoes and cooking oil. You needed your ration card to feed your family. And this is what started happening. You see these CAPs, these Juntas de Abastecimiento Popular, they were local. They were like in every neighborhood, right? And in every neighborhood, you'd go to your local CAP and get your little ration card, right? And it had to be, you know, stamped by the head of the CAP, by the head of the Committee of Popular Supply. And that head of the Committee of Popular Supply was a member of the Popular Unity leftist parties. And if he or she didn't like you, fuck you! No food for you, motherfucker! You're an oligarch. You're an enemy of the people. That's what started to happen in Chile. Food became politicized. The situation in Chile was just deteriorating on a daily basis, and the fucking leftists today, fucking pieces of shit who don't know any goddamn history, what do they say? They say it was Nixon who did it. That Nixon, because it's true, Nixon had a meeting with Henry Kissinger, and after the whole Allende debacle, and he said that he wanted the Chilean economy to scream. But you have to keep in mind something very important. See, today the world economies are completely integrated. In 1970, they were not. Chile's largest trading partner was not the United States. It was Argentina and Peru. Well, obviously, because they were right next door. The United States, oh, that was like some fantasy land. It was like way far away. America could want to squeeze the Chilean economy all they wanted. They weren't going to do fucking shit to the Chilean economy, especially not after all the American companies were expropriated by the Allende regime. The Americans were out of the ball game, and leftists today say that the Nixon administration screwed over Allende. No. Allende fucked over the country all by himself, all on his lonesome. He screwed the Chilean people and destroyed the Chilean economy. Now, it's all good and fine and funny, actually, to be talking about this, but I'm going to tell you a story that's not so fucking funny, okay? Allende was creating a paramilitary force that was basically loyal to the popular unity, but not loyal to the Chilean citizenry. This was called the Movimiento Izquierdista Revolucionario, these fucking leftist paramilitary forces. Now, these people, and I'm going to tell you a horrifying story because this is true. These people, they would go to farms, okay, and they would expropriate the land in the name of the people. And they would kill the landowners and their families. Now, it's not that I heard this story, that I read it in some book, or the Pinochet government, later would spread this, propaganda. No. I heard this story from a farmer to whom it almost happened. Now, this farmer, he was a classmate's dad. Okay? Now, I knew this girl real well. We went to school together. I saw her every goddamn day. And in our senior year, she invited us all, like near the end of the year, she invited us all to have like a get-together, like a barbecue kind of thing at her dad's farm, which was just outside of Santiago. And we went. We took the metro and then a bus, I remember. And got there, and great guy, our classmate's dad, and it was a great farm, and there was a pool. And we had a barbecue. It was great. And then some of us wound up talking to my classmate's dad and the foreman of the farm. Okay? Now, this was in 1985, right? The Allende government happened between 1970 and 1973, right? So it was relatively recent history. It was only 12 years before. And my classmate's dad told us how one day he woke up and there were trucks, and he pointed to the road where the trucks were coming. There were 3 trucks full of these leftist paramilitary forces, armed. And they were coming down that road that he pointed to the house that he pointed to, where he lived with his family, with my classmate, who was then a 5-year-old child. And these leftist paramilitary forces were hell-bent on killing him and his family, including my then 5-year-old classmate. They were there to expropriate the land in the name of the people and take it over and kill the landowner, kill his family, and establish, part of the new socialist ideal, the socialist utopia. Do you know why he was not killed? Obviously. I mean, I was talking to him in 1985. He survived, right? How did he survive? Because the foreman, who was standing right there and told us the story, it was the foreman and some other workers on the farm who worked for the landowner, my classmate's dad. They organized themselves and risked life and limb and shot up the paramilitary and drove them away. See? Well, that's what was happening in 1973 because of Allende. Now, of course, this goes to the point. If my classmate's dad had been this evil landowner who was just just a bloodsucker, do you think that the foreman would have gone out and defended him? Certainly not. Okay, if he had been this evil bastard, but he wasn't an evil bastard. He was just a regular guy. He worked the farm. He was the owner of it, but he was just worked as hard as anybody else. He was a decent guy. But to the leftist, it didn't matter. Or actually, it was even worse. Because, see, a decent landowner went against their ideology. A decent landowner, a decent capitalist, somebody who pays his workers fairly and is just a decent guy and does what he's supposed to do as a man, as a moral man, well, those are the people that the leftists targeted. They killed about 500 people during the Allende government. 500 people murdered by forces allied to the Allende regime. And the Allende regime did not denounce these people. The Allende regime was like, oh, that's They didn't say fucking shit. They were in favor of it. The Allende government wanted an armed insurrection. The Allende government wanted the popular unity to become the leading edge of the revolution, of the socialist revolution. Because ultimately you have to understand, Salvador Allende was a Leninist, and he was a Maoist who believed in total land redistribution. I mean, it was almost like you wanted to impose what became known as Pol Potism, you know? Because Pol Pot, what he did in Cambodia in 1975, that was essentially what Salvador Allende wanted to do in 1973. In August of 1973, the parliament passed by an absolute majority, almost a unanimity, a resolution asking for the military to step in and overthrow the Allende government. The Parliament of Chile asked the military to step in because the country was collapsing into chaos. On September 11, 1973, the military obliged. They stepped in, they took over the government, Allende shot himself, and that was that. It took about 18 months to pick off all of these socialist paramilitary people. In point of fact, actually, the socialist paramilitary continued with their activities of, you know, bombing high-tension towers, of shooting up banks to steal money to finance their operations. Now, this I know because I experienced it. I experienced blackouts during 1984, 11 years after the overthrow of Allende. The paramilitary were still going strong. They assassinated people. They tried to assassinate Pinochet once, you know, with a rocket-propelled grenade. And the only reason that they failed was because they'd actually been too close, and the thing apparently hadn't been able to arm itself by the time it struck his car. Okay, there was armed insurrection going on during most of the Pinochet dictatorship. Armed insurrection from leftist paramilitary loyal to Allende, organized by Allende and his people. See? You look at Venezuela today. In Venezuela, they're eating the zoo animals because there's no more food. Venezuela has one of the largest oil reserves on the planet, and yet they're completely broke. Why? Because they implemented socialist measures almost identical to the social measures implemented by Allende. Socialism doesn't work. But worse than that, I mean, it's perfectly fine if a system or an idea, an ideology doesn't work. Socialism wants slavery of the people. That's its goal. It wants to put people under its boot heel. Now, I know this because it was tried in Chile, and it failed, thank goodness. It failed. Now, I've read a lot of history of Russia. And, you know, it talks about the gulags and Lenin and all the rest of it, but it's just, you know, pages in a book. When you're standing face to face with a man who was almost killed by leftist paramilitary forces, whose family was almost butchered by these leftists, it's just a different experience. All of a sudden you realize viscerally how evil socialism really is, how evil this ideology really is. The sin, the tragedy, is not that Salvador Allende was overthrown after his 3-year socialist utopia. No, no, no. That's not the sin. It's not that he was overthrown in 1973. The real sin, the real tragedy, was that he was not overthrown earlier. The real tragedy was that he was allowed to become president and destroy a prosperous country. Because, see, at the end of the day, that's what socialists do. That's what they always do. They destroy everything that they touch.